Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything, from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Magical. Today, we're going to talk about a recent report that YouTube was scraped by Anthropic, Apple, Salesforce, and others to train their AI systems and whether or not this should be allowed. Good morning, Dee. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. When I saw this came through, I figured the question of training and proprietary information and data and things going into AI is going to be a big topic for quite a while. And I think I have some very clear opinions on it that not everybody's going to like. So we'll see how things go.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I feel like you're the perfect person to talk about this. We've mentioned this before in the podcast, especially when we did like our four-part topic on how we built a business and all that kind of stuff, is that you had majored in, experimental psychology as well as philosophy. And
Hmm.
that we've always found that philosophy background has actually played quite well with the business, because there's a lot of times that we have philosophical questions of whether or not something should be done or could be done, or things like that. So this is an interesting one. So here's what actually happened, and I'm going to get this directly from The Verge, where we actually read this article. Basically what they said is that about 170,000 YouTube videos were part of a massive data set that was used to train systems for some of the biggest technology companies, according to an investigation done by Proof News and co-published with Wired. So
Hmm.
Apple, Anthropic, Nvidia, Salesforce, and all these tech firms basically use the YouTube subtitles data, and that was ripped from the video platform without permission. So let's start there with the word permission. How do you feel about this? So this is YouTube videos are published on their site, and then below that are subtitles, and then as you're familiar, basically the descriptions and information about who the authors are, all that information. Do you feel like that should be public domain because it's presented on the internet and it's available for everyone to see and consume?
Well, here's the thing: for somebody who is reading somebody else's material or consuming somebody else's material and learning from it is not protected. You don't need it. Something doesn't need to be in the public domain for a person to read what they've written and learn from it. So, within we listen to Script Notes podcast. We both love it. It has if you haven't heard us mention this before, absolutely go check it out. They're talking about how narrative is constructed a lot, and that matters a lot for our work. And one of the things that they will say is that you don't get to plagiarism or copyright infringement until you're exercising or copying what somebody else has done. And if you're
Yeah.
just learning from something, if you're just learning from someone, then you're not plagiarizing. And it's not until you're actually exercising and doing like a copy and paste of what somebody else has said or
Hmm.
wrote or something like that. And that I can't say that that's not what's happening with AI, because I think some AI does this every now and then, but a well executed AI will not just copy and paste from parts of the internet.
Hmm.
It will generate things on their own based on information and speech patterns and those kinds of things in order to present an experience.
Yeah, let me be a little more specific here. So basically, these YouTube videos belong to about 48,000 channels, but it did not include imagery or videos. So it was just subtitles, and it was and included in those was like Mr. Beast, MK, BHD,
Mm-hmm.
BBC, ABC, that kind of stuff. So I just want to be clear on that. I understand what you're saying, and I'm kind of on that side. So one of the things I've been thinking about is that, like, if I go and I read something and consume it off the internet, my brain gets smarter, and then I use that information to probably create ideas or whatever it is moving along with my life, because it's a brain that learns and consumes information.
Mm-hmm.
Is AI, we keep trying to make it as a artificial intelligence, human, subhuman, and it went in there and it basically just learned off this information. It didn't steal necessarily the information, as far as we know. So what you're saying is because it just learned off of it, but it didn't actually like steal the information and plagiarize the exact words associated with those videos, that
Mm-hmm.
it should be fine.
I think so. If a screenwriter is reading Aliens by James Cameron just to learn how to write a screenplay, or if they're reading a Stephen King book to learn how to write a book, or if they're watching a YouTube video on how to uh, paint a painting or something like that, and they learn something, then ultimately that's learning. And going back to kind of the philosophy background, ultimately within philosophy, ideas aren't really owned by anyone. It's really about the way in which they express those ideas in a specific way.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I don't have a problem with learning. Ultimately, I don't have a problem with training. I don't have a problem with learning. I would have a problem if they are plagiarizing and taking those words and regurgitating them in a way that is clear that they are infringing on someone's copyright or plagiarizing somebody or actually and not doing it in a way like a human would, which is understanding the principles behind it and using it in order to perform better in whatever way. And I want to be clear a little bit about what's kind of at stake here a little bit, because we're all thinking of AI as it's showing up now of like it's going to write a term paper for you or it's going to write like an email for you or something like that. But there can absolutely be an AI system that learns communication well, that is using that to provide public services, that's providing health services, that's teaching children how to read, that's teaching immigrants how to learn another language. These are social goods. These are things that benefit all of us. And if it's not doing it effectively because its ability to learn was hampered, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, but you're talking about like if it could summarize this information without using like word for word. So like if there's a subtitle that is extracted and then someone asks a question about Apple and it uses that subtitle in order to explain something that's happening with Apple, do you feel like that's plagiarizing and stealing, or is that simply reframing something that it learned?
If you and I did something right, I mean, if we've learned things from all over the place, right, and then we teach other people or we use it in our work. If it's a unique expression of that idea, then it's not plagiarizing. And like you can look at Avatar, for example, right? Avatar is an idea of a person from a colonizing force coming in and connecting with the native population and joining their efforts. Goes back to, everybody points at Dances with Wolves. Well, Dances with Wolves you can look at and go back to Lawrence of Arabia. And Lawrence of Arabia, the movie is based on somebody's real life. And there's probably examples to go further and further back. I mean, you can look at Dune and it's kind of the same thing. So the core idea behind it is expressed in so many different ways. But Dune is not plagiarizing Lawrence of Arabia. And that should be kind of how it is here. If it is actually copying what that subtitle said, then that's plagiarism. That could be copyright infringement. That could be all these issues. If it is just expressing what it has learned in its own words, then and expressing an idea in its own words, then that's just learning and communication, and we do it all the time. And if
Well,
if AI can't do it, then generative AI kind of doesn't develop.
yeah. Well, what about terms of service though? So, like YouTube CEO Mohan and Sundar Pichai had both said, that if they scraped our transcripts
Yeah.
and our information, that they are violating the platform's terms of service.
So that is a different issue. What I would ask Sundar Pichai and the people involved with Google and YouTube is Gemini scraping those in order to learn,
Why does that matter?
because they have a vested interest in preventing their competition from gaining the same access to data that they have in order to, not saying that they are, I don't
Uh-huh.
know, but it could very well be that the reason for preventing this is not a moral issue, but it is a practical business issue. And again, I don't
Well,
know that that's happening,
yeah.
but if it is, then it becomes like, well, now you're really doing it so you can gain a competitive advantage with your data, which is fine. I don't think that's morally reprehensible or anything, but it does kind of shine a different light on things. But overall, I think that everybody should honor, if that is their choice or whatever their motivation is. I actually think that people should honor that choice, and I don't think they should play out in court kind of thing. I don't think there should be litigation behind it, or legislation, because that is too blunt a tool for everything that's going on right now. I think that this is something that the industry should kind of hash out on their own.
Well, let's say this. Let's play a little game here. Let's say this thing goes to court, and it's concluded that you cannot scrape data off the internet in order for an AI to learn. Do
Mhm.
you believe? Is an interesting question. Do you believe that they already have enough data that they've already scraped up to this point that they would never need to scrape any more data in order for the system to be effective?
Well, I mean, in need, probably not. I think it would be. I mean, this is a philosophical question, right? So the question is ultimately, should AI be limited in what it can what it can ingest in order to learn? That's a different question than should AI be allowed to plagiarize and copy what other people say, which is what I think a lot of people are kind of assuming based on this.
Uh,
We see this in summaries a lot of times of just like, oh, hey, here's a summary, then you find the link, and it is copying it. So I think that's kind of happening, and it needs to stop. It needs to reformulate that information in a different way. Um, but the concept of whether or not it should learn is one question. Whether or not how it presents that information is another question. Whether or not certain individuals, or groups can partition their information away from it is another one.
yeah.
I think when it comes to that partition, if you're saying I don't want this stuff to be used to train AI, then that should be respected. I don't think that should necessarily. Ideally, that wouldn't go to the government, because that's something, as grown adults, we shouldn't need legislation in order to determine things. We should be able to self-regulate, like the NPAA does with movie ratings and things.
Hmm.
Just act in a way that's ethical. And there are a lot of companies that will act ethical in this vein, but those are all separate issues. So it becomes a little complex. I think that AI should have access to materials and that are trying to do better. I think AI should not be just regurgitating uh, text or words or images or anything in a way that plagiarizes. And I think that people should have the right to set their stuff aside and say, I don't want this to be used to train. The other aspect I'm going to say real quick, is a little. What bugged me the most about this, from a practical standpoint, is that they use the subtitles, and the subtitles are not always great, especially the auto-generated ones.
Yeah, that's
So,
true.
are they learning weird things, and are they have processes in place in order to correct for that?
Yeah. No, that's an interesting one. I mean, I find that so this was non-video, non-imagery.
Mm-hmm.
The ones I find the most interesting are like these, like Sora, like
Mm-hmm.
OpenAI's tool, right? It's like so many people have reported, like, wow, it's interesting. I asked it to create this picture, and it looked very similar to something I had created,
Mm-hmm.
and they're starting to see similarities there. And the fact that the CTO, Mira Murati, kind of dodged all those questions and didn't want to say that they trained Sora on YouTube tells me that they are concerned about whether or not this is actually legal, right?
Uh, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't necessarily know. I mean,
That scares
he,
me even more. You don't even know what the system's doing?
well, I mean, how many executives are really know exactly what all of its employees are doing?
Well, she's the CTO of the company. Like, she helped create this thing, right? So it's like, if you say to me, I
Uh,
don't know what the system is scraping and doing, it's like, you should
I
know if
mean,
it's going YouTube.
how many CTOs know what every employee is doing? And what if there was, one group that hasn't reported to them directly that has done this, and uh, an executive goes out and says a thing, and then it turns out later, like, oh, we didn't tell you, or you didn't know, but yeah, this happened once, and blah blah blah. So I think what we can definitely know, we can definitely assume, is that you can't rule it out. It definitely might have happened. But I will ask again, what's the harm? And this could be stuff that's like, all right, what do you do if you get bit by a Black Widow? What
Yeah.
This could be stuff that's like, my child is choking. What do I do? Or my car broke down on the freeway during a heat wave. Like, what do I do? How do I keep myself hydrated and going into like heat exposure and stuff?
Well, you're now moving into I'm using the AI as my search engine.
Well, these are pragmatic stuff, right? So usually, I mean, what do we do when we need to learn how to do something? We go to YouTube because we can get a demonstration of exactly what to do. So uh, learning from that, I mean, they have the whole thing of um, YouTube University, right? I don't that often go to YouTube just for people's opinions on things. It is
Yeah.
usually like, what is something practical in order for me to learn how to, I don't know, cut crown molding or how to install a thing in my car or whatever it is. That's all stuff that people might be able to ask of the AI, and they're getting practical information that is not owned by an individual because they didn't invent that. They just kind of express something that's general knowledge.
Yeah, one of the other sides to this argument is the actual creators themselves. So
Hmm.
YouTube is the platform, right? And then you have the creators on top of it. A lot of the creators are now saying, "Well, hey, if you're gonna take my content and use it for training, then you should have to pay me." That's a tricky one as well because it's like,
Yeah.
well, I'm not paying you for, like you said, watching the YouTube video on how to cut crown molding. You're getting paid by YouTube because I clicked on the link and you got a view and then an ad was played. So
Well,
I
I
mean,
mean, again, it comes down to whether or not they're kind of using their content their expression of the idea, right? If Marcus Brownlee is going up and he's doing a discussion of cameras and what aperture means or
uh,
f-stop or things like that, he didn't invent those things. He doesn't own the concept of f-stop or aperture or shutter speed or those kinds of things. He's expressing it in a certain way that's probably being expressed by multiple other ways, and he probably learned how to is to some extent modeling somebody else on how he learned.
mhm.
So it becomes, how do you establish that they're using his content specifically in order to do that? And if they are using his words in order to do that, yeah, it makes sense to pay him a licensing fee.
This is gonna get
It gets
messy,
really
dude.
tricky, right? It gets really messy because it's like, well, how many? This isn't broadcast, right? These are individuals who are going to be consuming this. So now you have to an auditing system that's tracking. This is tagged with that. I mean, the AI can do it, but it's probably going to cost a lot of money to build that capability in.
Well, this is kind of where that whole idea came in of having search engines that you pay monthly for, and instead of having ads and all that other stuff, you just basically pay $9.95 a month, and then you use a search engine that has no ads, and then a percentage of that just goes to the creators, and it's done with.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of where that came from. Although those fell apart though. The minute that OpenAI released its model and showed how effective it was, a lot of those companies that were working in that area basically closed shop
Well,
because they realized it's not going to
yeah.
work.
There's an issue with that is that it again, one of the reasons why OpenAI put out ChatGPT when they did and how they did was so they can start getting data on how people are using it so that they can then make improvements on as far as their capabilities, as far as the delivery, all of those kinds of things. And we're starting that to trickle out through Microsoft and other companies also. But if you start to so bias within the data set is an issue, right? So this is why it's important for I know this is a charged word now, but diversity within the data set is very important because if you
Yeah.
only get people who are paying in order to use the data set or to use the AI and it's be trained on those people, then it is now going to misrepresent the population in general in order they're going to be overrepresented within it. And then it's going to kind of create a bias within the data that it delivers. And that becomes an issue of quality with the AI itself. Can you
Legal
imagine,
precedent.
like, for example, like an AI data set that was trained entirely on American users, and now you're asking it questions about Chinese culture,
Well, yeah, because we know that
right?
from doing research, right? We know that
Yes.
those cultural differences matter. That's why that we always have to hire companies outside the country in order to talk to people within that country, right? Like we know that, except for I would say that how much of diversity do you need for it to interpret that diversity exists, right? Because the
Hmm.
AI is supposed to learn, right? It would say like, oh, some people say this and some people say this, even if the data set's much larger. for, let's say, an American population versus a Chinese population. If you just have a small population, maybe that's enough for it to understand.
Maybe.
It's, I don't know, maybe, right? It's like
Well, you
complicated
you
because
you
we
need
don't
to.
know.
We know that you need to build in kind of the confidence intervals in the data analysis to understand, like, okay, I have X amount of representation from this culture or this group, and they represent this an actual percentage. So this is the level of confidence that I can have in the things. One of the things that most generative AIs are not good at right now is just saying when they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
They will give you the best answer that they have a
Yeah, just
lot, as
make it
opposed
up.
to saying, like, or they'll make things up, or maybe they got it from somewhere and it's like a bad source. They're not great yet at weighting the different values of the different sources yet. So they're not going to tell you necessarily, like, I have incomplete data on this population that you're asking about. They're going to give you the best answer that they have, and
Yeah,
that can be an issue.
interestingly, that's kind of like normal humans.
It,
Right. If
it
you ask someone, hey,
is.
do you know when that movie comes out? They'll say, like, I think Friday. They don't know for sure. They're just throwing
Yeah.
it out, right? And so it kind of throws it out. Maybe it learned that from us.
And there are definitely times, and I'm thinking of someone specific here who you know, who they don't know, but they'll make outlandish claims and just be very, very confident about it. Like a bet I
Absolutely.
won recently when somebody said that they think a hippo can run 80 miles an hour.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
A hippo can definitely not run 80 miles an
I'd
hour.
like to see it though if they did.
That would be amazing, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, we're still in the infancy of AI. One of the reasons we're still in the infancy of AI is obviously the technology, but also just the training and the data. And the more data that it can get in, the more useful it's going to be. Um, I was talking to someone. I think I told you this. I was talking to someone we respect quite a bit, and he said the words, I think in 5 years nobody's going to be talking about AI. I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but it's just because at that point it's just going to be software. It's going to
Yeah.
be omniscient.
Yeah.
It's going to be omnipresent.
Yeah. I agree with that. I would say that it's just software. Yeah, it's just like we're saying it's artificial and all that stuff, but once it hits that level where it's smarter than the average bear, I think
Mm-hmm.
we're just going to look at it as a tool, right?
Yeah.
I've already habituated to the fact that when I go to Google and I type something in, I usually look at the top portion now, the AI generated portion, and I don't really click on links anymore. And I shouldn't do that because I know that's wrong sometimes. But on some of the questions that I ask it are very simple questions. My assumption in my brain is that it's correct.
And a lot of times it is, or else they're good. They've gotten better at providing different perspectives within that summary. But it's a learning process, and it will
Yeah,
get better over time.
it will. What is your prediction about how this is going to turn out? Like based on this article, you know, my concern about legal stuff. I was just going to tell you this really quickly is that once we have legal precedent for something, it starts this ball down the hill. You know, of like
Yeah.
everyone's suing everybody and it becomes a huge mess. And so that's the only thing I'm concerned about is just not like I would prefer they have agreements on how this all works and
Mm-hmm.
just move forward rather than just like everyone's suing everybody.
Yeah, because one of the issues with suing or legislation is that it is something that is it's set in stone to some extent. And case law is a little different than legislation, right? But once you have a one size fits all solution for something um, that is very much more variable in reality, then uh, then it becomes really hampering and it becomes an inappropriate solution for the problem that you're trying to solve. Uh, the it's the problems that we have today might be gone in 2 years, and any kind of legislation that comes out in order to address that one problem could be having negative unintended consequences for new problems that crop up in 2 years. So
Yeah.
it is the kind of thing where it's almost too soon to do anything definitive. But I want to hear your predictions for where this is going, because I'm honestly I'm formulating a little bit on my own. I think hearing yours might help me figure out.
I think that I think Google and YouTube are going to sue anyone who's scraping them, and they're going to do it because it's kind of the right business decision to make is to put them on their toes and make them have to defend themselves, make them have to show in court how their system functions.
Mm-hmm.
This is where you get to learn how their system works. And then I think there's going to be probably some sort of settlement that happens, like either right before the court case or, during the court case, and we'll come to some agreement about how this all works. That's what I think is going to happen, because I think that's what kind of has to happen from a business perspective. I don't think they have any other option, because OpenAI is kind of doing a better job than Google right this moment.
Hmm.
And Google doesn't want to make it even any easier for them. And so, not just OpenAI, sorry, like all the basically LLMs and their associated partners, whether it be Apple or Nvidia or Salesforce, anybody, right? Everyone's getting in this
Hmm.
game now. So I think the lawsuits are going to begin, and I think it's going to start to set a framework for how it is that we're helping each other. Like maybe we're paying billions of dollars a year to YouTube now, as OpenAI, to allow to scrape their system, and they're okay with it because it brings in revenue and they don't have to do anything. But that's kind of where I think it's going to go. I think it's going to go to the courts right away. I don't think there's just going to be a sit down handshake agreement. I would like there to be, but I don't think there's going to be.
I uh, yeah, I think that I think you're largely right. What I might amend is that it might not be Google that sues. Google might put out some cease and desist. They might
Yeah.
do an extra layer of encryption so that it can't be scraped quite as easily. They might do something within the interface where if you want to set your videos to unscrapable, then you can. Um, it is a little bit against at least their public ethos to be suing other companies or individuals for this kind of thing, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. But I wouldn't be surprised if a coalition of creators does a lawsuit and names both YouTube and the scraping companies in order to get that. There's a certain level of discovery that needs to happen before it establishes a before you can establish who is scraping those people
Mhm.
specifically, which might be part of an initial legal motion. It is difficult. I think that you're right about a settlement. I think if it went to court, I think they would lose. And the reason why
Yeah.
they would lose, the suing entities, is that when you get to judgments, you need to be able to show harm. And I think it is going to be difficult to show that they lost revenue or were another way harmed because an AI became aware of what they said. Um,
Yeah.
so, I mean, you'd have to go in and provide like expert legal testimony that their video views and ad revenue went down X amount because their some point of their video is being presented X many times in response to a prompt. So
Yeah.
I think it's very difficult to do, even if you have the data in order to make the case. Not to mention how little these creators make from advertising, which is why everybody turning to Patreon and another monetization routes now. So it's gonna be tricky. But
Yeah.
it also wouldn't surprise me if the courts are just like, we don't want to deal with this. We're gonna
Yeah, exactly.
judge.
Kind of kick it back to them and say, no, you guys need to work something out.
Yeah, I think ultimately, long run, I will make this prediction. Ultimately, it will be like when people started posting photos on social media, and everybody kind of freaked out of like, oh, you posted a picture of me, and I didn't want a picture of myself on the internet, or the way people felt about privacy for a long time, or making payments. Remember how paranoid people were about
Mhm.
using like Amazon to buy something because they didn't want their credit card to be used. And eventually that all attenuated. Everybody got used to it. And it wasn't such an issue. I think that's one of the things that will eventually happen is that people will realize it learned from me. It didn't necessarily steal from me. I didn't like lose my livelihood because of this. And people will eventually kind of become more comfortable with it.
Yeah. I think so too. But I think we should do a follow up episode if we find out what happens. I mean, if it goes to court and things unfold in that way, I think it'd be really interesting for our listeners to kind of get our perspective, because we can always read the court proceedings too and just kind of figure out what actually happened in court. But I think this was good. This is a good quick podcast talking about something that you and I have been debating for quite some time and kind of exploring. So thanks everyone for listening to us. We really appreciate it. We post all updates as well as video versions of the podcast on YouTube at the X Podcast. So please go to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. Also, if you like this podcast and found it interesting or informative, it helps us a great deal if you subscribe or leave a review on whatever platform you use. Thank you all, and we'll see you all next week.